2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
Welcome to Project Recovery, brought to you by the Pinnacle Recovery Center. It's where my road to recovery began. This is a podcast about addiction and, well, more importantly, about recovery. I am Casey Scott. That is Dr. Matt Woolley. How are you?
I'm doing really great. How are you, Casey?
All right. You ready to attack this week?
Well, I mean, the week's getting close to being over, but sure.
Well,
I'm ready finally.
Why don't we just play on the pretense that this is going to drop on Tuesday?
Oh, okay, yeah. Rewind.
Are you ready to attack this week?
I am ready.
With vim and vigor?
You bet.
All right. And we're really honored today because we've got a broadcast legend in the studio today. Himself, Randall Carlisle. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great today. I appreciate you inviting me to be on.
All right. Now, before we get into kind of your story and everything that is Randall Carlisle, I want to tell you that it was probably 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I was working at Channel 2. And I had to do a morning bit, so I had to run over to the Harmons and get some flowers to go out there and hand them out on the street.
And I was working there.
Yes, and I was checking out. You actually stopped me. I don't know if you remember this. You said, "Hey, Casey, I just want to tell you I really like your stuff." And to me, that meant the world because I grew up watching you and I wanted to model myself after you and be like you. And when you said that, I was like, wow, Randall Carlisle knows who I am. And I mean, it was a big deal for me. And then to see you working the checking station. And so I went back and I kind of asked some people about the story and they kind of gave me a Cliff Note version, which we're going to get in a bit. But I thought, what a great guy to want to fight back and give everything and did the job. And it was a lot of the reason why right out of recovery, I started delivering furniture because I said, I need a job. Sure. I need to do something. And I can't let my ego say that I'm not allowed to do this job because I think there's a lot of people that wouldn't do it because like, hey, I was on TV. I'm not gonna bag someone's groceries. I'm not gonna move someone's furniture. But the reality is, I needed a paycheck. I need to pay alimony. I need to pay rent. So I need a job. And so I took the first job that was offered to me.
You said you wanted to be just like me.
Yeah.
You did a really good job at that, didn't you?
You nailed it.
So the thing is
we even drank the same drink.
Yeah, Bud Light.
Yeah.
You know, he sent me a text and he goes, your story mirrors my story. Before we get to Randall's story, just last week in the news, a fellow broadcaster got a DUI and then got another DUI. And it really hit close home to me because mine is not even a year old. And so we're talking about Hopewood side of Fox 13.
And she did it 2 days in a row.
Yeah. And so a lot of people reached out on the Project Recovery podcast, Facebook, and said you should reach out to Hope. And I did send her a text. I didn't get a reply, but I just said, hey, listen, I understand kind of what you're going through because everyone's story is different. Having been just through what you're going through now, if you need someone to talk to, it doesn't have to be on the podcast, it doesn't have to be anything. Right. I just, sometimes all you want is somebody to listen to you and not judge. And that's what I said. It'll be a judgment-free zone. I'm just here to listen to you because sometimes in that dark hour, you just want to be able to talk to somebody.
I've been friends with Hope for 20 years or whatever. And I reached out to her as well. And, I mean, I was shocked when I read that. I mean, even though Hope and I partied a lot, I was shocked over that. But again, she's also my worst drinking was after I left TV the first time, not by choice. And I don't know what her circumstances were, but that. The idea of not having the job that you...
Not having the stage.
That was you, for all those years.
You kind of go through an identity crisis.
So
because
Hope will get help, and she, and that's great.
But the only reason I bring it up, and I want to bring it up in front of you, Matt, as well, is I read some of the Facebook comments, and which is a bad idea. And I've talked to you a little off air about this. Is that 90% of the people on there were wanting Hope to get help and wondering if there's something they could do, and there was 10% that would just vilify her. And the thing that I wanted to bring up, and one thing that really struck a chord with me, is there's got to be something going on in that industry with me, with Shauna Lake, with Hope Woodside. What's going on? And I wanted to say, I don't think it's an industry thing. I think it's just what's going on. Ours is just more visual than anybody else's.
Well, you and I were talking off the air, and if it'd be a construction worker, somebody who works at Harmon's, and they got busted 2 or 3 days in a row, it would never make the paper. It would never make the news. And it's just because people in our industry are very visible. And when we screw up, people write about it and people talk about it. But and we do have an industry that is known for partying, drugs, sex, and rock and roll. That's always been the image of people in the media. But I don't think we have more of a problem than anybody else.
I always say we live our life in front of the camera, and what goes off the camera also goes on it. In a sense, is that I mean, that's how we made our money. So when things are going good, we can't just show the good. So when something bad happens to us, it becomes the news. And
I think it's totally fair because you're a visible person in the community. Hope is, you are, I was. I was smart enough not to follow in your footsteps in terms of DUI. So,
and that's the other thing is that, the DUI, they are going to get punished by the court, whatever the court system deems. And the other thing is that there's something going on. So let's talk about something going on. Let's go to the Randall Carlisle story. Now, you moved here in 1980, but you actually started in radio where before that?
I started when I was 14 in a little town in Ohio, and worked my way up in radio to a giant AM station back before the days of FM in Detroit. And then I decided to get into TV because people in Detroit TV were making a lot more than people in Detroit radio. And then I went from the only place that would offer me a job was Colorado Springs. I went there to Dayton, Ohio, to Salt Lake City, to Minneapolis, to Dallas, and back to Salt Lake City.
All right, now let's find out about your drinking a little. Did you start drinking as a teenager?
Yeah, I started when I was 14. I was always very insecure socially, and I'm not sure why, very insecure around girls at the time. And I can't remember where I was, but the first time I got high drinking, I felt secure and I felt great. And I just kept, I drank through high school, drank through college, and kept drinking the rest of my 50 years in broadcasting.
That a lot of people in the partying world, they call that liquid courage.
Yeah,
I mean, you get a couple beers in you, your confidence goes up, you say things that you normally wouldn't, or and so you started and realized that at a young age.
Yeah, and I just stuck with that. And I was a totally functional alcoholic for all those years. I never. When I talk about it now, people say, God, I was watching you on the air and you didn't look drunk. And I said, well, I wasn't drunk. And being an evening main anchor is a perfect shift for a functional alcoholic, if you think about it. I'd go into work at 2, get off at 10:35. I could then start drinking until I passed out to like around 1 or 2 in the morning and sleep till noon. And so I never went to work drunk. I never drank at work. I function fine professionally. Personally, my life sucked.
But that was a nightly routine for you.
It was every single day.
Every night.
For almost 40-some years.
And that was drinking not just to...
No, it was drinking to pass out.
To pass out,
yeah.
Right, okay.
And somebody asked me at an AA meeting once, somebody brought it up, say, did you ever drink for any other reason than to get drunk? And I didn't. Even, because in your teenage years, that's why you drink.
That was the main goal.
Yeah. And in college...
And I think a lot of teenagers have the same experience you're talking about, where in psychology, we talk a lot about behavior getting reinforced or punished. And if you were socially anxious, especially around girls when you were 14, 15, and that's the most important thing when you're that age,
Right.
is to feel comfortable around the opposite sex, and you drank and you felt comfortable, then that was highly reinforced. So your brain starts to crave that feeling of comfort, and alcohol is a pretty quick way to make that happen. So it starts off that way, but then eventually for most people it becomes, I just want to feel detached, I want to feel drunk, I want to drink every night.
I mean, one of my hardest things when I got sober was sleeping, because I can't remember. I mean, I know now, but I can't remember ever going to sleep. I passed out almost every single night. So there was no natural sleep. And I didn't know what lying in bed thinking about stuff was like, because my brain was numb.
See, for me, myself, a lot of times I would drink so I wouldn't have to think. Because if I would lay there in bed, my mind would go a million different places. I would start to get a panic attack. And so I would say, you know what, if I just have 2 beers, I won't think about it and I'll just go to sleep. And so, I mean, it's a way of self-medicating.
Yeah.
Now, when you were in your early infancy of your career and the broadcast journalism and the radio, was the rest of the coworkers drinking like you did?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I worked at this station in Detroit. We hit 28 states and 5 provinces, and we were in our 20s, and our after a minimum starting wage was $50,000 a year, and this is back in the early 70s. And so we thought we were just like mega stars.
That was a big income at that time.
Oh, horribly big.
Especially for a young kid.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And we were all just crazy partiers. And we were the number one rock and roll station in town, so you could go to any bar and pick up a woman, do whatever you wanted. You had groupies hanging around, and it was an exhilarating time. And so we all partied like that. And when I got into TV, not as much. I mean, there were, a mixture of the party people and the non-party people. So
now, when you were doing that, did you guys ever think, hey, maybe we have a problem? or was it just, hey, we don't have a problem, we've got this, this is what we're supposed to do?
Throughout my whole, I went through 4 wives, okay, and they all complained that I drank too much. And my and friends would say, you really drink a lot. And I say, yeah, I do drink a lot, but it's not a problem. And I went through that, that denial thing for decades, even though, and my mom is still alive. She's 91, and I talked to her about this. She's very happy I'm sober now. Alcoholism runs on the paternal side of my family through at least 4 generations. And so I was primed to become an alcoholic. But my point of, you could say that to anybody, saying if it runs in your family, maybe you should think about not drinking because you could become an alcoholic. My mom said to me the other day, she said, if I would have told you when you were 14 that alcoholism runs on the paternal side of your family, and maybe you ought to think about not drinking, would you have stopped drinking? No, because I pictured alcoholics as people sitting on the street corner with a paper bag and drinking out of the bag and shaking. That was my image of an alcoholic. So 4 wives, and may I ask, did they all leave because of the drinking? Drinking was one of the primary issues, and the fact that my world focused on work and then drinking and then everything else after that. And so if there was a social event that my wife would want to go to or something, my first question was, will they be serving booze? And I didn't go anywhere without, golf. I love golf, but I drank a beer every hole, and I'd come back just totally blotto after a Sunday. I mean, I didn't do anything without drinking except work. And so when I was home, I was never present for my wife. If my wife would have a beef with me and say, we really need to talk, I'd say, good, let's go to a restaurant. And then I'd drink and she could have a glass of wine. And that was our form of talking. So and every time I got divorced, it was like, back in those days, I blamed it all on her. I said, it's her fault. She's a whatever. And now that I've been sober like 7 years, I look back and I think it was primarily my fault,
So we're talking with Randall Carlisle. This is Project Recovery. Stick around. More with Randall coming up next. All right, welcome back to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction and, well, more importantly, recovery. We've got broadcast legend Randall Carlisle here. He's walking us kind of through the early years of your career and your alcohol. Now, let me ask you this. Was alcohol always your drug of choice? I mean, is that what your downfall was?
Always. I mean, I dabbled back in the 60s when I was in college, I tried LSD, I smoked opium, I've smoked pot many times, but I just preferred Bud Light.
Yeah.
How do you like that, Anheuser-Busch? When I got sober, their stock went down. I mean, boy, between you and me, we killed them.
I was the country club where I go golfing with my father. They just got a brand new bar, and they didn't realize I went sober. So I don't know how they're going to pay for it.
Exactly.
But you did that for how many years were you on air here in Salt Lake City?
Between Channel 2 and Channel 4, probably close to 30.
And do you feel like there was a lot of pressure on you during those times?
It was self-imposed pressure. I mean, you know, every job, it all depends on how you deal with the job. And me personally, I always have been a perfectionist. I always wanted things to be perfect. I wanted to be number one. I wanted to have every newscast have no mistakes. And so I put that pressure on myself. I mean, there is a lot of pressure in the broadcast industry as people strive toward perfection and ratings. But it's how you respond to it, I think, is what's important. And I always responded feeling that kind of pressure because I put it on myself.
Now, can I ask, so you had mentioned earlier that your drinking was a nightly routine. All those years you were getting off the news at 10:35 and heading out to drink until you passed out at 1 or 2. But taking that knowledge, combining it with this desire to be number one, to have perfect broadcasts, did you ever, during those 30 years, start to put together, like, maybe I'm not my best self, maybe if I cut back on my drinking, or did those two seem like separate issues to you?
They seem separate because I was pretty consistent on the air. Made very few mistakes ever.
Yeah.
Was sharp enough and knowledgeable enough about news that if something happened, like a live shot went down or whatever, I could ad lib about a news story and everything. So it never occurred to me. Yeah. I mean, it's occurred to me now. I wonder how much more successful I could have been had I not been doing that. I don't know.
And the reality is it's a little surreal for me even to be sitting here talking to you because I grew up watching you on TV, and I don't know that you could have been more successful. But the reality is I think what you're describing is similar to almost everyone's story, and that is that there is this disconnect between my performance in life, or a lot of times we talk about people's professions like Casey's and yours and others, and the drinking, and not making that connection that I might be better at what I do if I was in control of my drinking. And over time, those two eventually clash for most people.
Well, and they did for me as well. And I don't know why I never thought about that until I got sober. Maybe because I wasn't
it's usually the process of, denial's a powerful thing, and we all have our areas of life that we're in denial about. And it's often that when a person's drinking, they're the most in denial. The people around them, like you had mentioned, ex-wives and friends saying, "Hey, you drink a lot," but they're not in denial about it, but the individual is.
And my argument always with my wives. I sound like I live in Utah when I say that, don't I?
You do.
Yeah, I do live in Utah.
We want to talk to you about a reality show for you later.
My response was always, look, I have this good job. I bring home a good paycheck. Mm-hmm. I'm under a lot of pressure, so just go with the flow and just accept the fact that I drink a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I never I never really did any self-examination, and
that self-introspection that's so key to your recovery.
But it's something you don't do when alcohol or drugs have hijacked your brain.
Well, I don't think there's ever a class on that. No, no one ever tells you this, and until you get these tools, and that's what this podcast is about. And you said when you early started drinking, you did it for kind of courage and for that. When you got into the broadcast years and you're doing a nightly newscast, did the drinking then become a way to kind of relieve the pressure that you self-imposed?
Yeah, I just wanted to block everything out when I went home because I had the same problem you did. Because I would relive the 10 p.m. newscast if I hadn't been drinking. And if I drank to the point that I would pass out, I wouldn't think about it. But I'd say I'm the type of person that after a newscast, I'd say, we could have done this better, could have done that better. I wish when I ad-libbed to the weather guy, I would have said this, not that. And I just picked myself apart every night, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to forget about it all, and that was an easy way of doing it. It was a quick way of blocking out the day's activities.
Wow. So we got Randall Carlisle here, and he's talking about his addiction with alcohol. And so you mentioned earlier you lost the job first time for alcohol. Can you walk us through that?
I didn't lose it for alcohol. I was very lucky. I never got fired for that. A new company bought Channel 4, a giant conglomerate, and after like 23 years, one day I was called up into the GM's office, and he said, "We've decided to go a different direction, and we'd like you to leave today. We'll pay you for the rest of your contract." And it was like out of the clear blue. There were no warnings. There was nothing, and it didn't have anything to do with my drinking that I knew of, because I never was drinking at work or coming to work drunk.
Was there ever any talk about your drinking with coworkers?
No, I mean, even the GM who fired me on that day was somebody I golfed with every Sunday, and he got drunk with me. So, I mean, no, there wasn't. No, it was like he drinks a lot, but he comes in and he does a professional job. So who's gonna question him about it?
That coming so out of the blue. Talk a little bit about how that affected you emotionally.
Well, I went out and got drunk.
Okay, yeah. What was that like?
I was crushed because that was my life. That and drinking, and so I had trouble dealing with that, and that was believe it or not. I'll give you the timetable here. I went before that all happened. Thanks to pressure from my fourth wife, I went to detox and recovery at uni, an outpatient program, and came out of it sober, obviously, as most of us do, coming out of a treatment program. And after I got sober, that's when I lost, and I'd been clean for 9 months. My wife left me then, and I lost my job. And so
okay.
It was like, now wait a minute. Good things are supposed to happen when you get sober.
You finally got sober, and then
I finally
the two
get sober,
big
and my
things.
wife leaves me, and I lose my job. And what that said to me in my alcoholic brain was, "Hey, this is a good reason to drink." And I started, and not only that, you can drink full time now because you don't have to worry about being sober to go to work.
No wife, no job.
And so I really hit it hard, and I can't remember how long that lasted. And I was so bad that when I woke up in the morning, I had to drink 3 or 4 beers before my hand was steady enough to shave. And I just went at it full blast because I thought, well, sobriety didn't really do me any good. I lost my wife, I lost my job, and after doing that, I became more and more depressed, feeling worse about myself. I'd cut off all my friends. I really isolated at that point, just made sure that I had enough Bud Light in the house. And at one point, I called one of the therapists that I had met through my first time through the outpatient program at uni, and she said, if you can make it to detox, they have a bed. This was like a Saturday morning. And I live in a downtown, I'll tell you, I don't mind saying where. I live in American Towers, and we share a parking lot on P1 with the Hilton Hotel. And I was drunk by the time I had called her, and I remember stumbling through she said, if you can get there. And so I went down to P1, hoping to get over to the Hilton because it's easier to get a cab. This is before Uber. And I stumbled and fell several times on the P1 level, got to the Hilton hotel elevator, came up to a crowded lobby, and I'm stumbling and falling through a crowded lobby, and I'm sure people recognize me. And I got out to the curb, and the sky cap guy, or whatever you call them, helped me into a cab, and I went up to Uni and went through detox again, went through recovery works again. Second time around, and have been sober ever since for 7 years.
All right, I want to find out more about that a little later on in the podcast, but I want to talk about when you lost your job and your wife left and you started drinking and you said you went at it full time. How long did you go at it full time for?
See, I'm trying to remember because I was drunk all the time. You're asking me a question. It was for a period of several months, and I just became so... I hated myself. I felt terrible. I was more and more depressed every day, and I figured I'd either drink myself to death, or because I didn't have the guts to commit suicide, or I'd change things around.
So what made you pick up the phone and call that therapist? Do you know?
No, I don't. I interviewed her for a story I did just recently, or for a presentation that I did at an addiction conference at UVU, and I thought it'd be interesting to go back and interview her. Said, what do you remember about that phone call? And and she said, well, you sounded like you were pretty out of it, but you also were asking for help. And I figured, she said, it wouldn't have been in my place to come to your house to help you get to detox, but I made sure there was a bed for you if you could make it there. So I don't remember. I wish I knew, because if you could find that switch that clicked in my brain at that point, and you could manufacture that for everybody who's dealing with addiction, that'd be a pretty valuable switch.
Something
wouldn't
you
it?
just said a moment ago, though, might be a little bit of a light on that, and we're not going to know for sure because you were drinking at the time. But you said I was either going to drink myself to death or I'd turn it around. And to me, that's that little glimmer of hope that is always associated with that switch flipping for people. So why the switch flips may be unique for each person, but hope is always part of it. And it sounds like there was something inside of you that was still thinking, I could turn this around.
I guess there was. I mean, I don't know. That makes sense, though. Yeah. Otherwise, I would have just kept drinking and died.
Now, you said something that struck a chord with me, is that, I've only been in the recovery system a little over 200 days. But there's, from people who have been in the recovery world for long amounts of time and had their sobriety, they always say they either flipped the switch or something clicked with them. And you hear that with most people with their success stories, that it was either this or that. And for some reason, this took for me, or this made sense. And you want to find that in yourself, and what's going to be the switch, what's going to be the click.
And I think hope as a concept drives a person to find that switch for them, whatever it is. I think for a lot of people, it has to do with not wanting to give up the positive parts of their identity. And I think for the two of you, it's interesting because your identities are, like most of us, wrapped up in your professional self. I mean, It's a big portion of your identity. But also your identity is public. That professional identity is very public. And I think that that creates a sense of competency, like I have something to offer to other people. And that connection sometimes helps a person maintain hope during really difficult times, that connection with other people, as opposed to perhaps somebody who has their identity is very isolated and it's not connected with other people in a public way. So I think as much as that, what the two of you and other folks, Hope and others, are struggling with, while that can be difficult, it can also be helpful. Because, your brain might have been thinking, people are watching me stumble through this lobby, and I want to show to other people that I still have something to offer. And it's sort of like like peer pressure and that works for you instead of against you. And I have no idea if that was your experience or not, but I've talked to others where they think that maybe that was part of the motivation to kind of get back on track.
I remember saying in an earlier podcast after I got my DUI and I'm getting ready to go to uni the next day, I couldn't sleep that night, and I'd wake up and I'd go look in the mirror, and I remember telling Dr. Matt I didn't recognize the guy in the mirror, and that's what really scared me, because I was starting to become that guy and not who I knew I could be and wanted to be. And so for me, that was really powerful, going, I don't want to be that guy. And the guy looking back in the mirror, that's not Casey Scott. That's not me. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy for my kids. I don't want to be that guy for my family. I don't want to be that kid for the public. That's not who I am. So that really gave me a sense of drive, going, no, this is not how my story ends. This is not how it ends. I didn't work all this way to end it like this.
I think Matt's right. And maybe that's motivated me as well, and the fact that you have been fighting to get where you are or were for years. You get there, and then you screw it up, and then do you say, okay, Uncle, I give up on life, or I'm going to somehow turn this around? And maybe I was thinking the same thing, and without looking in the mirror, because my eyes would have been glassy and I couldn't have seen much.
I think both of you have a competitive streak, right? Wouldn't you both agree
horribly,
with that? Yeah,
horribly.
And you have to in this industry.
You have to. Nobody succeeds in such a competitive industry
you have
without
to fight
being
for your
that
spot.
way. And so I think that can be a trait that people draw on in those really dark times. I'm either going to drink myself to death, or I'm going to turn this around. And that competitive streak, I think, probably is part of that switch.
But that competitive nature was also a hindrance in my drinking, because if somebody told me I couldn't drink, watch, I'll show you. But I mean, I really would think that.
I'll make
way.
sure not to say that to you now, Casey.
Yeah. But I would do that, and I don't know if that was how you were. It's like,
my wife was always telling me, can you not drink as much? Can you please slow down, which would only speed me up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a double-edged sword,
Casey
I
and
guess.
I were talking earlier about the Big Book from AA, and there's a chapter in there, and they wrote that back in the 30s, and it was To the Wife was the name of the chapter. Women back then weren't alcoholics; it was only men.
Yeah.
But the chapter basically says, don't tell your husband who comes home drunk every night not to drink, because he's going to drink more.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the way, I was like that. You sound like you were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Who are you to tell me what I can do? I'll show you I can do it.
Yeah.
And I can do it all.
It all. Drink all night and work all day.
But the reality is you can't. You're right. Your worlds do collide. So you find yourself in that bed. You get up there, and you're in the uni for how long?
Detox for, I think it was 5 days. 5 or 6 days. 'Cause they keep checking you out, and they say, okay, they give you some
Ativan and Librium.
Librium is what they gave me, and then they wean you off it, and if you're okay, they release you. And I immediately went into my second time around at it's called Recovery Works, which is their version of an outpatient program.
And so you did outpatient. Why did you do outpatient rather than an inpatient?
It's a good question. I think I was afraid to do residential. I don't know. Maybe because I knew it, because I'd gone through it once, and I knew some of the therapists there or something. I don't know. I just felt more comfortable doing that. I probably, in retrospect, I should have gone into residential, because it would have been a much more controlled environment where I didn't have free time. But I think I was thinking at the time that I wanted to get a job of some kind. So that fits rather well, having to just go in the evening.
So what did your outpatient rehab look like? I mean, what was a day-to-day for you?
It was, I think, 3 or 4 hours a night, and you were divided into small groups, and then there were different activities on a daily basis. You'd do a different thing every day, and some of them I thought were goofy, like they'd have you dance. They'd have you. Those were the things I didn't like. They'd have you climb ropes and then stand down below, and I know why they were doing it and everything. Yeah. But and I preferred. And then one night was family night, where your loved ones would come, and I spoke at Recovery Works Family Night just this week or recently. because they have some graduates who come in and talk about it. So
when you were in the program, did you get noticed?
Yes.
And how did that affect you?
They said, first of all, we're really big on anonymity here, and they were very good about bringing it up. And it wasn't just because of me, but in every single group that we had, every single day, saying, okay, if you see each other out in public, you're welcome to talk to each other. But if you see me, you can come up and talk to me, but I'm not going to come up and say, "Hi, Jim, it's good seeing you again," or anything like that. And they really told me, because that was one of the things I expressed a concern about, and they said, your anonymity will be protected.
What goes on in here stays on here.
Was that hard for you, though, being such a public figure? I think by the time you were in rehab, everybody in the state knew who you were.
Sure, and people in the group, when you first went into the group, they'd all be sitting there staring at you, and
they're
it's
like, oh, it's Randall.
But then we had to all go around and tell our story. Yeah, it was
that hard
hard
for you to open up? Because I think for other folks I've spoken to, it can be difficult to just be genuine and authentically yourself.
It was really
because
hard.
you have that persona.
Yes, it was really hard.
Yeah. How did you overcome that?
I fought through it. One of the things, you asked me what went on, in this treatment program, and one of the things we had to do was to get out of the program was to write. I can't remember what they called it, but it was basically an autobiography of everything you went through in life, and they would call you out on it if you were lying or
I've said that
covering things
before.
up.
Those groups are ruthless because a lot of times you'll throw one across thinking that this is going to shut people up and get you out of having to be real. And people were like, hey, no, come on, man.
Yeah.
We're all in the same way.
Yeah.
We've been using these excuses. No, that's where the devil's in the details. And so they really want you to share, and they'll call you out on it quick.
And I think I learned over I can't remember how long the program is. Was it 45 days, something like that?
I think so, yeah.
And I learned to begin to share as other people were sharing with me, because they had things they didn't want to talk about. Some had been molested. Some had been, done really bad stuff when they were high. And as they began to share and I began to share, it became more of a mutual thing, and I wasn't as embarrassed about saying...
And I hope our listeners are really taking that statement that you just made, because those groups are very powerful, and a very important part of recovery is getting down to the honest basics of who you are. And as other people share that, it really has an effect on you, doesn't it? It makes you want to open up and share.
And
that's an important thing.
It tells me, if you tell me about some horrible thing in your past, then I think, well, I can probably share something in my past, and it works that way.
And, for a lot of times, that's the first time that they've ever said it out loud or they've ever admitted it to themselves. And a lot of times people will drink and use drugs to forget that, to hide it away, to numb it. And so when you get in there and you start to say it and you say it out loud, that might be the first time your very own ears has heard it spoken.
Yeah.
And there is a healing property to that. I mean, it really, and then all of a sudden you start to go, okay, this is a safe zone. And because people are sharing some of the darkest things of their lives.
I think the biggest thing I remember leaving there the second time is they ask us, and this sounds really goofy, but to write a love letter to yourself. And then they held on to it for like a month or two and mailed it to you. And then you read what you wrote. And it's like, Dear Randall, I will strive to love myself and respect my body more. I can't remember what all I wrote. I still have it in a file drawer, and I read it occasionally because one of the things I never did from the age of 13 or 14 when I started drinking, even though I, achieved a fair amount of stardom through TV and stuff, I never loved myself. And I can tell you that with sobriety and long-term sobriety for me, I've begun to love myself. And that makes all the difference in the world.
That's so important. I remember when we're going to go back and talk about a little bit about being recognized in treatment. When I was at Pinnacle Recovery Center, when I first got in, I was praying nobody recognized me. I was hoping
Good luck.
Nobody recognized me, And for the first 4 days, you're kind of in a daze. And then I remember one time I'm coming down from my bedroom, and the whole house, there was 15 of us, were around a computer, and they were looking at old clips of me.
Doing goofy stuff.
Doing goofy stuff. Yeah. And, you know, you'd see them look at the monitor and then look back at me, and then... But at that point, everything was out, and that's when I started. Because at first, I didn't want to share. I was, you know, I still was trying to put on this kind of I've got it together, you know what I mean. But it wasn't until I got honest with myself and it's like, well, the cat's out of the bag, and these guys, you know, let's just like you said, I just kind of turned myself over to the system and just fought through it and was like, all right, let's be honest and let's go with it.
Same thing happened to me. I think everybody in the group was quiet for a while, and they were all looking and thinking. And I think it was probably the third or fourth day somebody brought it up saying, "You're the guy on TV, right?" And I go, "Yeah, right." Yeah. And that broke the ice, and I understand that.
Yeah.
You know?
But, you know, I mean, but I think there's a lot of us out there, or a lot of addicts, that are afraid to be seen for who they really are because they don't know how other people are going to react. And when you're in that comfort zone of everybody who's kind of like you.
Yeah, and I think, Randall, you made a good point that the two of you have a unique situation, and folks who are well known, it's a unique persona. But everybody has a persona or an attitude or an identity about who they are, and drugs and alcohol are kind of a dirty secret that we don't want to share. Right. And so everybody has to break through that ice in these groups at some point. And that's why the group is so powerful, because that everybody's doing it, and that pressure to kind of give in and, like you always say, Casey, run an honest program, it eventually takes over for everybody. So I think it's unique that, you know, somebody might be sitting across from Randall Carlisle or Casey Scott saying, wow, I'm talking to Casey Scott telling him about all my dirty secrets. But pretty soon you just become Casey, or you just become Randall, and everybody becomes real. So I think that anybody listening to this podcast who's been through anything like this, they can relate to that, because we all have this protected attitude about ourselves, and we don't want to air our dirty laundry. But by doing that, you start that process of healing, self-introspection. And like you said, it sounds cheesy because we're a bunch of guys talking about loving ourselves here. Right. But isn't that is so important that we learn how to have respect and love for ourselves, and then we stop making self-destructive choices.
Right. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because for me, I always thought it was weird, and I've said this on previous podcasts, that I called my mom the second day in rehab, and I says, "Hey, Mom, I think I'm in the wrong place." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, there's people in here for meth and heroin. I'm in here for Bud Light," you know, because I didn't see Bud Light as a drug or drug of choice, like a lot of people said. Because we'd sit in these groups and they'd all say, "Oh, I can't go down to Pioneer Park because that's where I used to score heroin," or "I can't go here because that's where I got meth." And I stood up and I said, "This is ridiculous, guys, because after this meeting, all 15 of us are going to get in a white van and we're going to go to my dealer. We're going to go to the Maverick, because you guys are going to all get drinks, and that's where I get my beer."
Yeah.
And so, did you ever think that maybe you didn't have a problem because beer was legal?
I think for a long time I did. You know, I wasn't like that heroin addict down on the street putting a needle in his arm. You know, I did separate myself, and I don't know why, because I now, working at Odyssey House and dealing with people in addiction all the time, I'm no different than nobody. It doesn't matter. You're dealing with addiction, and you're dealing with recovery, and it can be from anything, and you can be from any walk of life, and we're all the same, you know. And that's what Matt was saying in those groups. I mean, it doesn't matter what your drug of choice was, or what you do professionally. It doesn't matter. You're an addict. I'm an addict.
I'm an addict. Yeah, you give something power over you.
Sure.
And you can't beat it. So we're going to find out if sobriety is possible. More with Randall Carlisle coming up in episode 2.